All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob. We are back with Spider-Verse. Now, this is the week of Thanksgiving. So just so you guys know, videos are going to be pretty scant this week. We're kind of hammering them out on Monday and Tuesday, and then my guys get the rest of the week off. Normally, I would just give them the whole week, but I wanted to kind of upload some of these, or at least record some of these, and we were running a little short on time last week and over the course of the weekend. So you'll have 3 videos. You'll have this one, you'll have a second one on Wednesday, we'll have Beyond Omega Level on Friday, and then that'll be it. And then next week, we'll pick back up with our regular scheduled programming. So what this does here is this picks up with Earth 98-120, yet another alternate reality here in Marvel Comics. And this one specifically focuses on Miguel O'Hara. Now, one of the things about this is that this version of Miguel is actually part of the Avengers of this universe. And we'll explain Miguel here in a little bit, or at least give him a little more detail. But this version of Miguel here, again, as part of the Avengers, is basically experiencing this kind of feeling where somebody's stalking him, right? Where somebody's hunting him. Now, here's one of the big differences between Miguel O'Hara and the other Spider-Man, and this is something that we'll address as things go on with Spider-Verse, is that each time a version of Miguel is killed, he feels it, right? He actually experiences a kind of dizziness or a kind of haziness that impacts him physically whenever that happens. Now, this particular Miguel doesn't really seem to experience that. Instead, you basically have Morlun who shows up on the scene and basically overpowers the Avengers. And when I say overpowers these guys, it's no small thing, right? Like, these are some heavy hitters in Marvel Comics. Well, heavy might be a little over exaggeration here. I mean, you got Captain America and you got Wolverine, that's cool. You do have Genus Vell. This guy is nuts. Okay, assuming this guy has the same power that his main Marvel Universe version does, he's actually a genetically created version of Marvel of the Kree. But this guy got so powerful, he actually recreated the universe, right? This guy's powers is just, it's stupid, right? He was so powerful, Marvel had to kill him off and then basically replace him with Phyla-Vell. Of course, Phyla-Vell was really cool. She ended up becoming the new Quasar in Marvel Comics during the whole Dan Abnett cosmic era. But nonetheless, this guy's a universal force is basically what we're getting at here, right? Morlun overpowers every single one of these guys. Like, he literally drains Genus Vell of his cosmic energy. He attacks Wolverine and Captain America, takes both those guys out, and then in turn kills Miguel O'Hara, siphons his energy off, and then basically bails. Now, when that version of Miguel O'Hara dies, Miguel O'Hara from the main Marvel Universe, that's the one who experiences this whole thing. Every single time that happens, it almost kind of seems like he's losing a piece of himself, right? It's kind of a mental backlash to a degree. Now, while this is happening, of course, he's currently in the present in the main Marvel Universe. It's a whole story arc involving like Tyler Stone and everything from his timeline. Not overly important here. The fact is that he is currently here in the present day. There's some villains that are trying to get away. He, of course, ends up incapacitating them. But the first thing he comes to the realization of is, with all this going on, I need to get a hold of Peter Parker, right? I need to find out what's going on here. And so what he ends up realizing here is that with everything going on, once these criminals are basically sorted out, at this point, it's on the hunt that caused him to feel this just kind of giant headache of what's going on there. And so what you end up doing is that in this moment, when you have Morlun that kills that alternate reality version of Miguel O'Hara, there's actually a kind of portal, which is more of a viewing screen that opens that allows Miguel O'Hara from Earth 6375 to view everything that's happening. And of course, he's basically realizing that Morlun and the Inheritors are killing all the different versions of himself. Now, for those of you guys who are familiar with Marvel Comics, specifically in the mid-2000s with Exiles issue number 75, you know who this guy Miguel O'Hara is. He was part of the Exiles for a long time. Now, for those of you guys who don't know who the Exiles are, they're probably one of the most underutilized but most interesting superhero teams in all of Marvel Comics. These guys basically travel the multiverse. And so you got some stupidly good stories with the Exiles back in the day. The Exile stories that I actually enjoyed the most were the ones that were basically post House of M, the World Tour story arc. So you got to see them traveling to like the future Imperfect universe with Maestro Hulk. You got to see all kinds of cool stuff, right? It was awesome to see them travel the most popular alternate realities in Marvel Comics, but they were basically like imagine an Avengers team on a multiversal level. That was basically the Exiles. I'm very certain we're gonna see them in the future of the MCU coming out of the events of Doctor Strange 2, assuming the multiverse remains intact. But nonetheless, this guy Miguel O'Hara was part of them. Now, one of the things he says is that while he was there with the Exiles, he did become aware of Morlun and the Inheritors, but they never actually crossed paths. And a lot of that was just because of what we saw when it came to like Spider UK, right? Like the incursions, dealing with all that stuff, and the fact that like Saturnine didn't really care about the fact that Morlun and all the Inheritors were hunting the Spider-Man from across the multiverse, that the multiverse itself was actually failing. While the Exiles were a big thing in the mid-2000s and the multiversal collapse had not actually begun yet, there were a lot of other threats out there the Exiles had to deal with. And so the reality is, these different inheritors traveling around the multiverse and killing Spider-Man wasn't the most important thing to the Exiles. And honestly, they didn't realize how far-reaching it was. It was really more whispers and murmurs, right? Things that people were kind of talking about in these sort of shadowy corners of the multiverse, but nobody really knew that it was as big as it was, that the inheritors had been killing hundreds, if not thousands of Spider-Man up to that point, and they've just continued on during this time, right? And so as a result of that, with this alternate reality version of Miguel, he realizes that there's so few Miguel O'Haras left in the multiverse that his idea is to basically find as many alternate versions of himself as he can, and then basically unite them. That's an important thing to grasp here. This guy doesn't know Superior Spider-Man is assembling an entire spider army. He's totally unaware of that, and it makes sense, right? If I asked you right now, what's going on in Times Square? Like, what are people doing in Times Square? You couldn't give me an answer because you're not there. You have no idea what's happening out there unless you have an apartment that overlooks Times Square and you're watching this video. Then sure, you could give me an answer. But outside of that, you wouldn't be able to give me an answer. And that's what we're talking about, right? I mean, it's one of the things we've said before. The multiverse is a big place. And so it's very, very easy for all kinds of things to happen out there and for you to have no idea that any of it's actually happening. Now, this also seems to indicate that each one of the Miguels that were killed had never seen or never been greeted by the spider army of Superior Spider-Man. Either that, or if it did happen, it was after this version of Miguel stopped watching. And so regardless, his response, this alternate reality version of Miguel, is we need to go to the Earth 616 universe. We need to go to the main Marvel universe. And when this reality's version of Mary Jane Watson asks him, why are we going there? His response is, because it's the one place that Morlun is scared of, right? It's basically kind of like a safe haven. He's like, Morlun doesn't want to go to the main Marvel universe. He's afraid of being there. He's died there before. And every time he goes there, he seems to die. So he's just terrified of it. The problem is that main universe is not a permanent safe space, because while Morlun is afraid to go there, his other relatives are not. And so it's only a matter of time before they show up in that universe and try to attack that reality's version of Peter Parker. But at the end of the day, we need to go find Miguel O'Hara in the 616 universe, wherever it is that he happens to be. And so what ends up happening here is that following Miguel's story, he begins kind of experiencing, again, one of these just giant headaches. And then following his kind of leaving a big meeting and going onto the rooftop, the portal opens up. And when it does, you're basically met by the arrival of Morlun that caught up with Spider-Man 2099 from Earth 6375. It killed that alternate reality version of Miguel. And when he did, of course, he siphoned off his energy, basically, taking his life force. And then Miguel, again, experiences that massive headache that basically happens whenever an alternate reality version of himself dies. And so, of course, Morlun drops the body. But it's one of the funny things here is that Miguel watches all this happen. And while it seems like Morlun is standing there for hours, in reality, it's only been a couple seconds or so. But he looks terrified. He's afraid to enter the main Marvel universe. It terrifies him because he's just been killed by Peter Parker every time he's come there. And so he doesn't actually enter. Instead, he just stays. And then eventually the portal closes and he basically walks away. But because of this, because of the fact that main Marvel universe Miguel, right, 616 Miguel, witnesses the death of his alternate reality counterpart, that he basically realizes we've got to find Peter Parker. Now, having said that, there are a couple things that I do want to address here. First and foremost, this version of Miguel O'Hara, the main Marvel universe Miguel O'Hara, he is referred to as 616 Miguel. That's actually not accurate. Technically, he comes from Earth 928, which is in the future. Earth 2099 was initially the actual future of the main Marvel universe until Marvel started abandoning the ideas of guaranteed futures and in turn turned them into alternate realities, just possible futures. And so that's why you see stories like Marvel 2099, you see Days of Future Past, Old Man Logan, they're all referred to as alternate realities, because while any one of these universes could actually become the future of Marvel Comics, we wouldn't really know until we got to that point. And creating an absolute guaranteed future started to become a big no-no under Joe Quesada, right? It was one of those things where make it an alternate reality. It's a possible future. That way we're not locked into having to make sure that everything that we publish leads into that future. And so the other thing about this is the reason why Miguel has these headaches is because the alternate reality version of himself from 6375 had basically used exile technology across the multiverse to create a kind of headband that psychically linked every single Miguel O'Hara. Now, it wasn't as though all the Miguels knew of all the other Miguels. Instead, it allowed him to know where all the Miguels were at and what they were doing. But because of the fact that the headband was linked to the multiverse, it linked all the Miguels to him using a psychic connection. And that's why the main Marvel Universe Miguel O'Hara would experience those headaches, because he was basically getting visions of when each version of himself died. It's also the reason why when that version of Miguel with the headband died, the headache that Miguel experienced was worse than any of the others. And so again, I felt like that just kind of needed to be stated here. I know it seemed a little confusing at first, and that was one of the things that I didn't initially catch on to when we originally covered Spider-Verse, but I felt like it was something to sort of reiterate here. So with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. I will see you guys on Wednesday with our next video, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.